As we pursue our walk as believers, each one of us finds that we have to take our own journey. And I want to discuss a little bit what that journey looks like for each of us. It is obviously different and unique depending on where we've come from, where we are currently, and where we're going. And most definitely what stage of the journey we're in. I think one of the things that we struggle most with in our Western thinking, however, is that our walk with the Lord is about arriving at some kind of moment where we are bold in our faith and filled with power, and signs and wonders and miracles just spontaneously combust around us. And anything shy of that, I think we sometimes feel is failure or lack or unbelief on our part. And I just want to talk a little bit that perhaps that isn't entirely true. That just like in the natural, all of us, as we have even discussed before, have a growing up process. And so I'd like to just take the life of Abraham and talk about something I call the Abrahamic journey. Because this is such an important part of what we do as believers, as our heart posture shifts in the processes that we have to go through that I think are pretty consistent for each of us. I know I have certainly walked through some of these and expect to still walk through more of them. And I would dare to believe that perhaps you're in the same place I am. So let's take a look at Abraham's life and see some of these similarities we can pick up. I actually want to start by talking out of the scriptures in Acts chapter 7. And that may seem like a strange place to start the life of Abraham, as we know his account is primarily recorded in the book of Genesis, and we'll certainly be going there. But in Acts chapter 7, Luke records specifically for us what I would call the first call of Abraham. And many believe that this is actually prior to even what was spoken to Abraham as recorded in Genesis 12. So we'll go to Genesis 12, but we're going to start in Acts 7. So in verse 1, it says, "And the high priest said, 'Are these things so?'" And everything we're about to hear is a response to that question. And this is actually at the time that Stephen is being martyred for his faith. He is the first recorded martyr of Christianity. And this is the response being recorded. And he said, "Hear me, brethren and fathers. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran." That's why I say this is actually prior to the call in Genesis 12. "And the Lord said to him, 'Depart from your country and your relatives and come into the land that I will show you.' Then he departed from the land of the Chaldeans and settled in Haran, or Haran, I'm not sure which way I've heard it pronounced, both ways. And from there, after his father died, God removed him into this country into which you are now living." So the first thing that the call went to was to Abraham's family, to come out of where he had been, and even the relatives that he'd known, and go into the land that the Lord would show him. And so Abraham starts by taking a small step of faith. And I appreciate that small step, small in regards to all the other things we see him do in his journey with the Lord, but big in regards to he was getting up and leaving even the land of his inheritance, which was a really big deal in those times, as land was passed generations down and inherited, and to start completely over was not something anybody necessarily wanted to do. And so, but the Lord knew that, and so Abraham took a small step, being he didn't completely leave the country he was from, or the area is from, but he got up and he moved with his family. And then we find that, and of course we call him Abraham now, as we know the Lord changed his name later, but at this time he was still known as Abram. And so now going back to that, the scriptures in Genesis chapter 12, we look at, and the Lord says, starting in verse 1, "Now the Lord said to Abram, 'Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, I liken this to like a Gideon moment, when the Lord shows up and Gideon's hiding on the threshing floor, and he says, "Valiant warrior," and Gideon's hiding in fear and has never fought anything in his life. The Lord is beginning to speak destiny and identity over Abraham, and I think he absolutely does this over us as well. And even in our early years with him, he will begin to speak to us of great things that we are invited to and can participate in and to share in. And in that, he's saying, I know who you are, even when you don't. And I think as believers, we really struggle with this, because particularly in the beginning of our walk, we can be so full of faith and feel anything is possible with the Lord when we're first really hearing his voice for ourselves, or really getting an indication of where he might be taking us. And it seems so far beyond us and so big, but we're so full of faith in that moment because we've just been started to identify as his, that we're all in and we're willing to step boldly out in our faith and not even ask a whole lot of questions. And certainly we don't know for 100%, but it doesn't seem like Abraham was asking a whole lot of questions like, so how's that going to happen? And where are you going to take me? And what is that going to look like? And what do I have to do? And what do I have to not do? And all those things. And we don't tend to ask those questions right off. But one of the things we have to understand is that our destiny is also conditional based on a response. And so what I mean by that is that the Lord is saying, I'm inviting you to this. I'm inviting you to come and be one of my people, and I will be your God, but you have to leave those other things behind me. And we understand at salvation that that's an important part of our walk. But even that choice is there, and conditionality, meaning we don't receive salvation by just Christ dying on the cross. The work is finished there, but we have to accept the finished work of the cross. And so in the same way with our destiny, the Lord can be offering or inviting us into something, but we have to accept it and begin to walk in the things he asks us to. And so we tend to fall on two camps, I think, as human beings. Either we go, okay, it's all on you to figure that out, because I can't do anything, and so I'm just bound to that happening, like I'm your slave or your robot. Or we go to the other end of the camp, and we go, oh, well, so you said I'm supposed to be this, so I guess I got to make that come to pass. And what I like about Abraham's journey is that he does a little bit of both. So on one hand, he doesn't ask a ton of questions. He just goes, okay, I'll do the one thing you asked of me. I'll get up and leave my family. And so he leaves his homeland. He goes on out of Ur into Haran. And when he gets there, or Haran, as I said, when he gets there, he goes, okay, I kind of did it. And the Lord says, okay, but I need you to do it all the way. I need you to really pack up your wife, Sarah, and I need you to take her, and he takes his nephew Lot, and I need you to really leave, not just kind of leave. So this is like not just going a little ways, but I need you to be completely obedient so I can bring these things to pass in your life. Now at that point, do I believe Abraham could have stayed put? Absolutely. The Lord didn't pick him up and translate him out of Ur. He didn't even pick him up and translate him out of Haran. He just told Abraham what to do, and Abraham had to respond. So in that, the Lord ends up calling Abraham twice before he becomes completely obedient to the word the Lord had given him. So in that, we see, okay, Abraham's walking in obedience. He's walking in confidence that he's pursuing the Lord, but he doesn't really know the Lord or his character. And so he knows the Lord has said certain things, and he knows the Lord's leading him, but he's not convinced of the character of God. And we can kind of see this really play out, particularly a little further on in chapter 12, starting in verse 10, when he goes, there is a famine in the land. And so this can be confusing because here the Lord said, come out and go into the place I show you, and he takes him right into a place where there's no food. And so immediately Abram has to try to figure out, well, what am I supposed to do now? You must have not realized there was famine going on, God, so I'm going to go to Egypt and make sure we're taken care of. So, of course, we're all familiar with the story. He gets into Egypt, and he becomes afraid that they're going to kill him and take Sarah into captivity as one of Pharaoh's wives. And so instead of risking his own death, he claims that Sarah's his wife. And we know the Lord appears and rescues Sarah out of that situation, and Pharaoh becomes aware that Abrams deceived him. And so Abram at this point, he's still going, I don't know that you're trustworthy, God. I know you said to do this, and I know you said to follow you, and I'm doing that, but I'm not really sure I'm safe. I'm not really sure you're going to feed me. I'm not really sure you're going to protect me. I'm not really sure that you have my family's best interest in mind. And I would dare say that all these things are beginning to reveal areas in Abram's heart that he probably didn't even realize were there. And in the same way, when we take our own Abrahamic journey and we begin to encounter challenges and trials and tests, many people teach us that the Lord is testing us or submitting us to circumstances that he could know what's in our heart. And yet I would say that the Lord probably knows us far better than we could, or like for instance in Abraham's case, he wouldn't have called him out of his country and made promises over him to this magnitude. But what Abram didn't know was what was in his heart. I am certain when Abram decided to pack up and go, he was feeling pretty good about himself. I'm following the Lord. I've got this great journey. I've got this promise ahead of me, this sense of adventure and conquering, right? But he had no clue the weaknesses or the vulnerabilities in his heart. So when famine comes and he finds himself in the land of Egypt, suddenly a vulnerability is exposed. And Abram leaves Egypt, but sadly he doesn't deal with the vulnerability. And so we find, though, that doesn't mean that Abram is not a good man. It doesn't mean he doesn't want what the Lord has offered or invited him to. It just means he's human and his heart is being revealed in the process. So the next thing we see come to pass in Genesis chapter 13 is that Lot, Abram's nephew, is there's discord and division with them, and then Lot goes on his own way with Abram's blessing. But then Lot is kidnapped and taken along with his wives and his children and his belongings. And Abraham, I apologize, he's still Abram at this point, but Abram says, not on my watch, and he goes after him at his own expense, and he lays down his life for Lot. And I just love that picture because he's beginning to reflect the heart of the one that he's been called into covenant with. And so he's growing and he begins to realize there's certain things I'm not going to tolerate, not on my watch. And I believe as believers, we come into that same place where there are things that are challenged in us that even surprise us, the lengths we will go to stand by our convictions. Now, what I appreciate with Abram is that he had some convictions and some preferences. And so his convictions of not allowing his nephew Lot and all that belonged to him to be taken from him and abused and sold into slavery, he was willing to lay his life down in that area. But when it comes to his wife Sarah and protecting her, his heart's not quite there yet. And so we see as the account of Abraham's life continues, that God continues, though, to call out and speak to Abraham the blessing and his identity over him. And isn't this so like the Lord in our lives? Just when we think we got something either really right or really wrong, either way, the Lord just shows up just like he does for Abraham in chapter 14. And a blessing is spoken over Abram. And again, he's talked about, and we see Abram meeting Melchizedek, the high priest, and he's offering him a tithe, so he's growing in even his understanding of giving and offering and sacrifice before the Lord. And Melchizedek blesses Abraham and speaks to him about his identity and the protection of the Lord. And so the Lord then begins to visit Abram more prominently in chapter 15 and begins to talk to him about his son. And so again, this is a journey of every believer's heart, because first it's just about Abram, and then it's about leaving his family and going out for his country, and then it's about what are you doing with your wife, what are you doing with those that you have been given care or charge over. And then suddenly he begins to speak to some of the deepest desires in Abram's heart, and says, "Do not fear, Abram, I am a shield to you, and your reward shall be great." And he goes on to talk to him about having an heir. And Abram totally doesn't get it. He is thinking, okay, well, if I don't have any children and I'm going to have an heir and I'm going to be blessed and my seed is going to go out, then it has to be through my servant. And the Lord's very clear that this is not how it's going to go down. But Abram's not totally convinced. And I don't know about you, but there have been plenty of things I felt like the Lord says, this is for you in your future, and you just go, oh, well, I just don't see how that could happen in the natural, because I'm not wealthy, or I'm not married, or I'm not a parent, or I don't have reputation, or I don't have a degree. And the Lord is continually just saying, but I know who you are, and I know what I've put in you. And we don't even necessarily have to agree that we understand how that could be. The Lord is just asking us to put our trust in what He knows above what we know. But through this whole encounter of Abram's life up until this point, he's like, you're really calling me to walk out on faith in a way that is not precedented around him. And so he is seeing vulnerabilities and weaknesses and desires and strengths of his heart all exposed through this journey of circumstance that comes lining up one right after the other. And I believe in our life these things are meant to do the same thing, but we don't always see them that way. We just see them as events, or my choices, or other people's choices. And really they're intended to be that which reveals what's in our heart, because the Lord already knows what's there, but very often we don't. So then we see that Abraham continues, and he begins to really fret over this word about having a son and not having one. So he feels like he's disqualified himself. Or maybe Sarah's even disqualified him. And she's feeling the pressure of that. And so, of course, he goes into his servant, Hagar, and they conceive Ishmael. And boy, is this a picture of what we do, isn't it? Where we try to figure out, oh, if I'm called to this, then that must mean I'm supposed to be, if I'm called to be a worshiper, then I should be on stage at my church leading worship. Well, whereas there's nothing wrong with that, doing those things, that may not necessarily be what the Lord was talking about when he says you're called to be a worshiper. Yet so often we just go, well, this opportunity speaks to the promise that the Lord's given me, so therefore this must be that. And I just say that that is a challenge to our hearts in that moment to pause and go, you know what, I may be getting out of order or ahead of you, or sometimes stalling and staying behind you. And so really this is a test of our heart. Do we want the Lord's way, or do we want the thing that He has promised us? And so in all of this, what's being revealed is what's in our hearts, not so the Lord, because the Lord is confused who we are, but very often because we are. And so I love the fact that right after chapter 16, where it talks about Ishmael being born, it goes into the account in chapter 17 of Abram being renamed Abraham and the covenant of circumcision coming. And we know from the New Testament that this is a type and a shadow of the heart of stone being removed and a heart of flesh being put in its place. So a soft, yielding, tender heart in place of a stubborn, hardened, rebellious heart. And so I love that that is the very picture that comes right after Ishmael comes onto the scene. Because the Lord is saying, you know what, Abram, I'm going to call you Abraham because you are going to be the father of many nations, and you haven't disqualified yourself because in your heart and in your immaturity, you've been trying to do this your own way. But I'm going to continue to peel off the layers that are hardened against me and do not yet trust me fully. And so as Abraham then from that time forward begins to interact in ongoing ways with the Lord begins to talk to him about the birth of Isaac. And you have to know it had to have been a little confusing to Abraham at first, because he's going, but wait, I already figured this out. I already got a son. See, just use what I already made. And the Lord is just being very clear. No, I have a plan. And if you're going to follow through to the place that I have prepared for you, you're going to have to do it my way too, not just your way. And so after Isaac is promised, we see the friendship between Abraham and the Lord develop. And in that friendship, they begin to discuss Sodom and Gomorrah. And of course, the whole situation with Lot, where Abraham goes in and lays down his life once again, and making sure that his nephew is rescued out of harm's way. So now when Isaac is born, we have to understand that this is like the promise coming to life. Everything that Abraham for 25 years has been waiting to come to pass, and the Lord has been patiently revealing how his heart can handle it. But as Abraham is watching Isaac grow, and he's seeing, this is not only my son, the one I've longed for, the seed, everything, but it's also the calling, the promise, the very thing I left my homeland for, coming right before my eyes. And then we see Abraham being asked of the Lord to take Isaac up a mountain. And in so many ways, I think many of us have experienced this. Just when we think we're right at the place of, this is what I want, the Lord says, I need you to lay this down for me. And really in that place, what Abraham found was that his heart had come to a place where he could be confident in the Lord over himself. And in that confidence, he didn't have to hesitate to go up the mountain and lay Isaac down. Now, I can't personally imagine preparing to sacrifice my own child, let alone that being tied into my identity, my calling, everything else, the destiny God had promised me. But what I can say is that I honor and respect Abraham for coming to a place where his circumstances never dictated what he understood about who the Lord was. And I believe that is the price and the benefit that Abraham gained through this journey with the Lord, was that he came to know in his own heart the Lord in a way that nothing could take that from him. And I believe that's what the Lord saw in him when he spoke to him way back at the beginning, like we were talking about in that first call out of Acts. It wasn't, Abraham, I need you to do a thing for me, and I'm going to make you okay for this. I'm going to determine if you're worthy of this. It was really, Abraham, I see this in you, and if you'll walk with me in all your mistakes, in all your weaknesses, in all your vulnerabilities, at times lying, at times being vulnerable, I can even work with all that. But what I need you to know is who I am, because I already know who you are. And all these circumstances of Abraham's life were meant to reveal who the God he had chosen to serve really was. And that's what happened on that mountaintop that day, is Abraham said, I know who you are. and my heart will not be swayed in that. And in our own Abrahamic journey, the Lord is asking, do you know who I am? Because I already know you, but I desire to be known to the depths of the places that I know you. And that is the invitation before you. If you have not considered your life in those terms, I encourage you strongly, go back and think, what do I know of the Lord for sure? And how did I come to that understanding? Not what have I been told, what do I hope is true, what do I think might be possible, but what do I know about who you are that nobody can take from me? And that will help you understand where you are on your own Abrahamic journey, just like it does any believer there is. The importance of knowing his nature far outweighs any promise or any thought or potential or lack in our own identity, our own behavior, or our own weakness. So I just encourage you in that today, to know the Lord your God experientially, looking through the lens of what you have discovered about him thus far.